Okay, we're on. Welcome, Ariel Lugo. I'm here with my partner, David Tilley, and I'm Mark Brown. Ariel, great to have you.
Hey, good to be here.
So I guess the first question is, when did you meet H.D. Odum and under what circumstances?
Well, I was a student at the University of Puerto Rico. I was maybe 17 years old. I was in my second year of college, and uh, I was in the biology department building, which is an open building. It's a tropical building, and there's this long hallway, and Odum emerged out of one of the ends of the hallway, and he was carrying this board, this huge board. He was going to come and give a seminar at the Department of Biology, and that's the first time that I saw him. I met him, and I was amazed at what he was carrying. He was carrying his famous analog computer that he had built um, from electrical parts, and he had a solenoid, a silicon cell to measure photosynthesis, the analog of photosynthesis, condensers for storages, and he had resistors to control respiration rates, heat sinks, and voltmeters to measure the flow of energy. And so the different things were labeled plants, herbivores, carnivores, and it was an amazing display of an early analog computer, which I know a lot of people talk about. I actually saw it the first time I met Odum.
All
That was
right.
1962, by the way.
And it is still alive and well. That it is right now, it's in the hands of Bob Knight, Robert Knight,
Really?
here in Gainesville. I think he wants to give it to Pat. But doesn't he want to give it to Pat Kangas?
Pat had one for a while. I don't know, were there two? Because Pat had one in his office.
Okay. There
Odum.
might be two, yeah.
But that was years ago. I
Anyway.
was kind of curious. I remember Odum talking one time very briefly about how he was inspired by playing with electrical circuits when he was a child. I don't know if you had any kind of background story on how Odum thought about it or
No, no. I remember I'm a 17-year-old and student, and he later became my major professor for my master's thesis. And you know, actually, wait a minute. My mind, in 62, I was already uh, close to graduating because I graduated in 63. So I was a junior
Okay.
already. So listen, Odum to me was like, this giant, this celebrity that came to Puerto Rico, and it was a super scientist. And so you didn't talk to them. I was always very deferential, very humble. And I was always humble when I was in the presence of Odum because, he,
Yeah.
he always represented this father figure he would give you tons of time. He would talk to you to death on ecology and anything you wanted to talk about, but we didn't fraternize with him in terms of the personal, motivations behind his doings.
Mhm. So he was there for the Rainforest Project. Is that
Yes, yes.
you met him? Yeah.
He was starting the Rainforest Project, and he used to come to the biology department. And at the biology department, I was under the influence of Graciela Candelas. She was a molecular cell physiologist, and that was the route that I was going to take, cell physiology with Graciela. And when Odum showed up, Graciela, I guess she says, "Look, Lugo, you're not going to be a good cell physiologist. You better stick with Odum." And then she stuck me with Odum because Odum was hiring. He needed technicians. He needed people to get the project going. And that was my first job. When I graduated with my bachelor's degree, my first job was in the Rainforest Project. And the story goes, I, you know, in Puerto Rico, I mean, you go to college because you want to make progress in life, etc. So Odum hires me. He picks me up in the Jeep. It was a Jeep, that famous Jeep, where he taught me how to drive and where he lectured me using the windshield of the Jeep. He would lecture anybody that was in that Jeep on the windshield. I remember one day we were in traffic in Puerto Rico, and I'm sitting there, and Odum is asking me, teaching me about driving, and he says, who if you want to draw the attention of that driver over there, what do you do? What's the fastest way that you can draw attention to people? And of course, the answer had to be flashing the lights, not honking the horn like we do in Puerto Rico. And those Jeeps that they were downshifting, on the stick shift. No, you had the first, but you also had the reverse there when you put it forward. So when Odom was in teaching mode, he would become very, very specific. Okay, you hit the clutch and you put it in gear, and you hold to the wheel, and take the clutch out, and you accelerate. And of course, he had put it in reverse, so he accelerated backwards. Just typical Odom. But the point was that he gave me this job. He took me to the rainforest. He dropped me there, and I never saw him again for 2 months. And I was stuck in the forest for 2 months, and my job was carrying the bricks that in the radiation design, it was concentric circles with the center where the radiation source would go, and there would be 16 lines for the azimuth, northwest, etc. And my job was to make those lines and carry the bricks at each intersection for the concentric circles. So there was a 3.2 meters, at 10 meters, at 30 meters, 80 meters, 160 meters, and 300 plus meters. And for each intersection of the compass line, I had to carry the brick there and paint it white and put the number. That's what I did all summer long, carry bricks. And I said to myself, gee, I have a bachelor's degree, and this is the kind of job that I wind up doing, and it was very, well, to me, it was exciting because the first time that I'm away from my home, but I'm in the rainforest. I'm in this project, but actually I never saw Odum, and I never took signs or anything for 2 or 3 months. So that was my real introduction to Odum.
So just briefly, the Rainforest Project that was funded by the Atomic Energy Commission, AEC, I think, and it was to irradiate the rainforest and see where the radiation, where it wound up. Is that right?
That's correct. Well, the effects of the radiation, because there's a historic controversy about the rainforest. We can talk about it later, but at the time, the United States was looking for peaceful uses of nuclear energy, but they were also talking about opening up the Panama Canal, an alternative to the Panama Canal, using nuclear weapons. And so there was a question as to how resilient rainforests were to radiation. And so lore has it that the reason the radiation project was conducted was because of this need to find out how resilient rainforests were to radiation for military purposes. You see, that's the controversy today. Was it military or was it ecological? And of course, with Odum, it was always ecological, and he always told us, well, we got money to do this, and we're going to answer the questions that they want, but really what I want to do is learn about the ecology of the forest. And so that was the internal line, but the external line was to use nuclear weapons to open up the Panama Canal. And so that's, that was the baseline for it. It was about resilience. And that was one of the first lessons that we learned about resilience of rainforests.
So
So,
maybe you could share a little bit more about just kind of the details of that project. So you got the bricks and the layout to do the sampling for the radiation effects. And then like what's the source of the radiation? And then like how long was it out there and what kind of measurements were you guys doing?
Well, the source of the radiation was 20,000 curies of cesium that came probably from Oak Ridge in a lead pig that weighed 2,000 pounds. Now, Odum was paranoid about making sure that the radiation treatment, was unaffected by other factors, such as scientists trampling the study area, uh, uh, or any other thing. So he had a control site and the radiation site, and he never told anybody which one was going to be the actual irradiated site, because he wanted everybody to do similar studies in both centers. So both centers had to be outfitted the same, the only difference being the radiation source. So several stories, funny stories in the process. Well, Frank McCormick, who turned out to be my advisor for my PhD, he made a study of trampling on the radiation on the centers. And he discovered that there was more trampling in the irradiated site than in the control site. And he concluded that the scientists guessed where Odum planned to put their radiation source, because they actually trampled that one more than the other one. So and that's in the rainforest book. The other thing had to do, in the project, we had 3 workers, native workers from the neighborhood, Alejo, Doroteo, and Juan. These are legendary workers because these workers, they knew the forest in great detail. And we were coming in without any knowledge of the rainforest. I'm talking about the scientists. Me, myself, I was total ignoramus. But we had PhD students there, and we had scientists coming every so often for 10 days. And nobody knew the forest as those 3 workers did. So the 3 workers educated all the scientists that came in to study the radiation location. So Pete Murphy was a full-time technician with the project. I was a student, so I was in and out, except for summers. One day, Murphy and I are walking the trail, and the workers are ahead of us, and they wield machetes because, a Puerto Rican worker always has a machete in hand. And the vegetation grows very fast in the tropics, so they're cutting the trail that Murphy and I are happily following. We're always joking around because, we were extremely young, and this was a great adventure for us. So all of a sudden, as we go down this trail, opening it up, Odum comes running down in his khaki pants and his white shirt. He always wore khaki pants and white shirts into the woods with sneakers. He comes running down the trail, no cote, no cote, no cote, no cote, no cote. What the hell is he saying? No cote, no cote, no cote. No cote, if you know Spanish, he was trying to tell us, don't cut anything. Don't cut, no cote. That was his Spanish. His Spanish was very broken, and it was a source of amusement for all of us. So he sat down and he told these workers, and Murphy and I are listening, that you don't cut the forest because this is our study site. We are studying this. We cannot cut. And then he goes into conservation, and he goes into a deep explanation. My first lesson in conservation ecology, right there, I have never forgotten. And before this interview, I checked with Murphy, and Murphy still remembers that moment vividly when Odum came in running down the trail and told us, no cote, don't cut the forest if you're going to study the forest. So that was Odum in trying to keep these radiations, radiation place from the control site. So on a Friday, he comes in and he tells us on Monday we're going to have a helicopter from the Puerto Rican government, the electric company, and the helicopter is going to bring in the radiation source, which was at the time lying in the parking lot in El Yunque National Forest. At the time, it was the Caribbean National Forest. It was on a parking lot. There was this crate, and inside the crate was this pig, 2,000-pound pig of lead with the radiation source inside, the 20,000 cesium source. And so he announces this on a Friday. And he says, Lugo, you're in charge of making a sling that we will give the helicopter and connect to the source and hoist it so that the helicopter can place it exactly on a concrete pad that had been constructed in the center of those circles, in the radiation center. Now, he's one of my worst weekends because at the time, I was totally intimidated by the Americans. I'm a Puerto Rican and I'm an introvert. And so if I'm given such an important task for Monday, when the helicopter is going to come and bring the radiation source, the least you can do is give me the opportunity to solve this problem. How the heck am I going to do this? There was this half-inch cable of steel cable that I was to use. And I didn't have the initiative of telling Murphy and the others, hey, we need to do this now. I didn't do that. I accepted the task, and we all left for the weekend as normally do in the carry-all back to San Juan. And all weekend long, I was sweating this assignment. On Monday, when we come in, we're supposed to do the sling with the workers, and we don't have the proper equipment to cut that steel cable. We're hitting the cable with a machete. We're trying to build this thing, and then I hear the helicopter.
Oh,
The
no.
helicopter is approaching as we're just still hitting the cable with the machetes, and Odum comes down the trail. And this is the first time I saw Odum mad. He was really mad because his expectation was that when that helicopter showed up, that sling was going to be ready, and of course he was not ready. And that was on me. And then I heard, how much money the helicopter is costing by the hour. As we struggled to make the sling, we made the sling. Eventually, the helicopter picked it up. Then that thing was, swinging wildly as the helicopter lifted. And I said to myself, Jesus Christ, I hope the sling holds, because if the sling breaks, that radiation thing is going to be in the slopes of El Verde. And, it was moments of great agony. But the helicopter came in and put that thing right on the thing, because those guys were used to doing this with electrical poles through the topography of Puerto Rico. And so they put in the radiation source right on place, and everything was cool. It was connected. The radiation source was connected to electrically to the field station, which was about 2 kilometers away. And the way it worked, it had a magnet that when it was electrified, the magnet came active and pulled the radiation out of the pig, and then it would irradiate 360. And if you cut the electricity or heat off, then it would come down mechanically. And he was doing radiation for 3 months. And we stopped halfway through to see what was happening. remember at the time, the Brookhaven had already irradiated a pine forest. And an article that had the cover of Scientific American had shown the radiation source in Brookhaven and a circle around it about 30 meters wide with nothing growing.
Hmm.
So we were expecting to see that in Puerto Rico. When we stopped the radiation I think it was during Christmas time, we all ran to the forest to see the disappearance of the trees, etc. Nothing. There was absolutely nothing. It was exactly the way it was before, and you had all these scientists looking. If the leaf wasn't perfect, look, this leaf. This leaf looks, looking for anything dead, nothing dead. Nothing. And it was the same thing after the 3 months. The rainforest took that punch in the chin, and initially showed no effects. Of course, later things started dying, and eventually you did get an area of about 30 meters where everything was killed, and there was all kinds of leaf fall and weird things happening. But the resilience of the forest, turned out to be superb. Now, we did biomass studies throughout time, and 30 years later, if you plot the biomass of the normal succession
Mhm.
and you plot the biomass of the radiation area, the biomass of the radiation area has never caught up with the biomass of the non-irradiated succession.
Wow.
Even though you go there personally, you look at it, the canopy is closed, the trees are green, they're growing well. It's just not the way it was. And
Aha.
I think that's an interesting insight, ecological insight, because it was resilient, but the radiation dose that it received, which was potent,
Yeah.
it was in the hundreds of thousands of Rankins, and the pine forest turns out to have a lethal dose at 500 Rankins, which is the same as humans. 500 Rankins, you're done.
Yeah.
100 X-rays, you're done. But the rainforest took hundreds of thousands of Rankins.
Wow.
And the way it paid, it was by not having as much biomass eventually and we don't, there's no explanation for this. Probably the key is in the soil, which is always the least studied area, part of forest. And there's people now doing a lot of work in the soil, fauna and microorganisms in these forests, and
Mhm.
finding a whole bunch of interesting stuff.
You don't by chance have a rainforest book there, do you?
Yes, I do. It's behind me.
Did you get it just to show it? I don't, there's a
Oh,
lot of people who have never seen it.
Well, the biggest document produced wasn't one of them.
It's huge. You got it takes a graduate student to carry it around.
well, it's 10 pounds. It's 10 pounds. And uh, it's 10 pounds, and it's very thick. There's an interesting story about this book. This book won a prize as the best government publication of the time. Is
Mhm.
Odum and Pigeon. Pigeon is the co-editor that knew about editing, but Odum did not allow anybody to publish their results in journals, because his idea was, he'll give anybody money to come to Puerto Rico, work for 10 days, establish whatever studies they wanted to establish, and then, we technicians, we would follow their studies and make sure that they were completed. But Odum said, the only condition, you have to wait for the book. And so by so doing, and I think Pat Kangas in his history book makes a point that it is the best integrated study that the AC ever commissioned, because normally what happens with most research is everybody publishes it on their own in their favorite journals and nobody
Right.
puts it together. And this book is together. It has everything makes sense. Why? Because Odum was there writing the introduction to every section, the summary chapters, he putting it all together. And as scientists did not like the fact that they couldn't get journal articles out of it, but they were bound. And so I think that Odum did right, because it is in, we call it the green giant.
Yeah.
Some people use it to hold doors in their offices against the wind, but you know, you can, it's a mine, it's a gold mine. You can find all the details. The other thing that Odum did, he published all the data there, so that you see the original data, because Odum always emphasized the data. He says, you know, show your data. Don't come with all these fancy statistics and reach conclusions that maybe are not real. But the point was that the data are there, and you can go today and redo a study if you want to. You can develop sequences if you want to. I mean, you can do all kinds of things with that book.
And there isn't a thing in that rainforest that wasn't studied, from microbes all the way to, to macrofauna. I mean, everything. There's a
Oh,
chapter in there somewhere that was, somebody studied.
and
It's
it's
a,
amazing. It's amazing to go and read now what Odum wrote about each of those sections, and he was very insightful as to the role of microbes and the sources of. There's a lot of good theory in that book. It was, that book came out when I was in Chapel Hill getting my PhD, and the book was so intimidating that me, the introvert, when I said, "Holy cow," if I go back to Puerto Rico when I get my PhD, what am I going to do? Because I was still ignorant enough to think that Odum had done everything. And because Odum had done anything, I went to Florida instead, instead of coming back to Puerto Rico. And lo and behold, then Odum goes to Florida too. So I continue to be, now I become a colleague of Odum, not a student of Odum. And that was that was also extremely interesting. But it took me 10 years in Florida before I realized that there was a lot to be done in Puerto Rico, and I came back to the island, which is something that well, I don't regret going to Florida, because it was important to my career.
well, I have very fond memories of you at that time being there. So you, after participating in the Rainforest Project, then you went to Chapel Hill. And you got a master's first and then a PhD?
No. I got my master's in Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
My
Okay.
master's in Puerto Rico was Odum assigned me the gas exchange equipment, and I was in charge of doing the photosynthesis and respiration of forest compartments. And so for my master's, I did seedlings. And I didn't know it at the time, but at the time, Odum just brings you all this equipment. Uh, you know, Odum always, if you need a pound of nails, buy 10 pounds. That was his philosophy. And I learned that we all made fun at the time, but then we realized that he was always prepared. So he brings all this equipment on gas exchange. I didn't realize that equipment was designed for laboratory use only. It was not designed for field work. And so but he wanted it in the field, see, because he wanted to measure the metabolism of organisms in real time.
Right.
And that was my job. Totally ignorant, a good technician. First thing he does is he makes sure that you understand the theory. And that's another thing I learned from him. If you're going to use a piece of equipment, know the theory about how it functions.
Mhm.
And so first I had to be schooled on that and schooled on how to calibrate the equipment, which I did. But then he says, okay, now take it to the field. The first time that we took the equipment to the field, it was in a stretcher. If you can imagine this, up steep slopes, all this electronic gear, recorders, a generator, a 6 kilowatt generator, the gas exchange equipment, solar cells, YSI recorders, everything. It was me and Odum, carrying this stretcher with all this electronic equipment. And we established a shed in the forest, and we put all this equipment inside this shed to keep it away from rain. And so we had to carry gas and we had to run the generators. And I was able to get light curves for different species of trees, the fast growing, the slow growing, the plantation species. And I had a ball doing that. Then came out the big cylinder where Odum wanted to do the whole forest. I mean, it never ended with him in terms of expanding things. But the point was that was all pioneering work.
Yeah.
Because now when I see students going with their Lycor, which is 30 pounds, and they go in one day and they do everything I did for my master's that took me a whole summer. Wow.
Yeah.
How much have we made progress? But the point was that was my master's thesis. And
Okay.
Odin then was my advisor. So he was my advisor for my master's. And I remember turning in my first draft of the thesis to him. When he turned it back to me, I did not recognize what I had done. I mean, there was so much on top of what I'd done that I said, what? Nothing, almost nothing that I wrote was acceptable to him. And then he gave me some lectures on how to write a paper, which I have always followed. And I tell anybody that asks me, what do you write a paper? Well, Odom used to tell me, don't read the literature first. That's the opposite of what you says. Why? Well, if you read the literature, you're going to be biased. You have to follow your own hypothesis, your own instinct. Then you read the literature to see if you're right or wrong. That's an interesting point of view. Start with the methods, he always said. He always made me, because no computers at the time, right? Everything was in paper. So sheet of paper, put a title on, then put the introduction, but don't write it because you haven't read the literature yet. Then start with the methods because you know what you did. And you should be able to write the methods first. And so on and so on. He went in with his lectures on how to write papers, which were very, very practical.
Yeah.
So when I go to Chapel Hill, I go there not because Odom invited me. I go there before Odom. See, I went to Chapel Hill before Odom was in Chapel Hill, and I went to Florida before he was in Florida. When the Rainforest Project was going on, Frank McCormick from Chapel Hill came into Puerto Rico to study seedlings and do population ecology. Because Frank McCormick was a population ecologist.
Mm.
Odom was an ecosystem ecologist.
Yeah.
Autumn, so McCormick, I'm the technician assigned, so, follow him and do everything he has to do. One day, having lunch in the rainforest, we always took lunch break and sat down under the trees. He says, how would you like to come to Chapel Hill and study with me? And I said, oh, that's interesting. Yes, I said. And so, I had applied to other schools for my PhD, but McCormick offered me a full-fledged scholarship. I did not have to do teaching. All I had to do was my research. And so McCormick took me in to do population ecology, which, I'm ignorant. I'm still learning. I'm still too young. I go. Odum says, you chose a good school. That's good that you go to Chapel Hill. But he didn't tell me why. Of course, the why was that he was already probably accepting a job in Chapel Hill. So Odum shows up in Chapel Hill later in the zoology department. Pete Murphy and I are in the botany department because McCormick recruited both of us.
Uh-huh.
Odum gets mad that we're McCormick students. Actually, Pete is the one who suffered the brunt. Odum was never expressed anything with me, but Pete told me that Odum was upset that he wind up with Frank McCormick and not with him. So Odum was in my committee for my PhD. But before I got Odum into my committee, I started trying to be a population ecologist. And so I selected, like everybody does when you go into a botany department, I selected the plant species that I was going to study, Hypericum gentianoides, I think it was. It was a weed. And so I started looking to the herbarium and reading everything I could about Hypericum. And that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I convinced McCormick to let me study, because Hypericum is a plant species in the granite outcrops
Mm.
that McCormick has studied in southeastern United States. Granite outcrops are fantastic microcosms because
Yeah.
they're islands within a sea of granite where the soil accumulates, and there you get these plants. And so I said, okay, I want to study the whole thing. That was Odum's influence. And so I did the metabolism of whole islands. I put whole islands in big tents because I had already seen Odum doing the rainforest in a tent. So why can I not do one of these islands? So I worked on that. That was my PhD work, and Odum was part of my advice. My advisors.
Mm.
Let me tell you a story about Charlie Hall, because
Okay.
we were all together. I mean, Scott Nixon, Charlie Hall, Pete Murphy, Jack Ewell, all famous ecologists. We were all together in Odum classes. And, and so one day, you see, Odum was a great naturalist. And I took under him the first systems course that he taught in North Carolina. And in that systems course, that's when he was writing Environment, Power, and Society. And but another course that he used to teach was marine biology. And in marine biology or marine ecology, he would take the students to field trips. So they're walking down this beach in the coastal zone of North Carolina, and all the students, Odum is ahead like usual. Odum is always ahead, and the students behind trying to catch up. And then he would stop now and then, and he says a few things, and takes off again, and the students going right behind him. And it was amazing because Odum knew all the organisms. He knows everything. And you can't catch up with that. You're always studying, trying to catch up. So in one of his stops, he pulls out an algae that had beached on the beach. And he says, anybody knows what this is? Nobody knows that. But Murphy, who's a prankster, and he tells Charlie Hall, who's the absolute extrovert, he says, that's freshwater sargassum. Freshwater sargassum. I mean, there's no such thing. But he puts it in Charlie Hall here, and Charlie Hall, he wants to impress Odum. He says, I know what that is. That's freshwater sargassum. Odum, he had one characteristic. He always tried to make you look good. He never tried to make you look bad.
Right.
And he always, no matter how much stupidity you tell Odum, Odum was trying to turn it around. He said, maybe this is a new species or something. You could discover it. But that's the Charlie Hall study, the story. But there's one about Scott Nixon. Scott Nixon became the most famous estuarine ecologist in the United States in Rhode Island. Scott Nixon was a super A student, and he came specifically to work with Odum. And Scott Nixon and I were in the same office in the botany department. So one of the things that Odum always asks us to do is do a model of whatever system you want.
Yeah.
And you had to go and defend your model in front of the class and with Odum there, you know. And so Scott Nixon decides to do a model of turtle grass system. And he works, Scott Nixon was a very serious student. I was never a serious student. I learned and I studied, but I like to play basketball and I like to goof around with Murphy. We used to do all kinds of pranks in the university. Some of our pranks made it to the Tar Heel Daily, because they were that level, well thought out pranks. But anyway, Scott Nixon is working real hard on his turtle grass model. And then before the class gets, before we go in, he shows the model to Murphy and I. And Murphy says, turtle grass system, huh? Where's the turtles? That destroyed Scott. What the turtles? He thought about the turtles. So those are the kinds of things that happen with Odum. They had all these students that were intensely focused on his teachings. We want to satisfy him. We're going to learn from him, and we were always trying to elbow each other, looking for his time, looking for his attention. And I guess it all worked out because so many great ecologists came out of those classes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Mark.
You got your PhD, and then from there, did you go directly to Florida?
Yes, I went to Florida because I had I had a professor in my committee, Helmut Leith. He's another. I don't know if you've heard of Helmut Leith.
Yes.
Helmut Leith was, he was also a systems ecologist. But he was a German, and it was good to have Helmut Leith around in Chapel Hill because Helmut Leith, no matter what you did, no matter how exciting it was, and you used to show him, hey, look what I found. And then he says, oh, we've done that in Germany many years ago. We've done that in Germany. Oh, the Germans already did that. So everything that you showed Helmut, the Germans have already done it. And it's probably true because the Germans, they had a long tradition and they study systems very thoroughly, but you had to read German to find out. We didn't have that ability. But the point was that I applied for several jobs, and Helmut said to me, "You better stay in the United States. Don't go back to Puerto Rico. Stay here and learn something before you go to Puerto Rico. Make all your mistakes here, and then when you go back, you will be in a better position." So when I was in a meeting of the Association of Southern Biologists, I forget the actual name of that association, and there was the chairman of the biology department in the botany department in Florida, and he had this job, and he was offering the job to Jack Ewell in front of me. And I say, wow. But Jack didn't want it. He didn't. He winds up in Florida later, but at the time he said no. And I said to myself, boy, but hey, me, how about me? So I applied for the job, and I went in for an interview, and I got it. And I spent 10 good years at the University of Florida, making all my mistakes,
Right.
just like Helmut had
I certainly
anticipated.
I certainly remember the paper that you and Snedeker wrote and your work on mangroves, which is pretty historic in itself.
Yeah, that for a long time that was my most cited paper. It's still, I think it's not about number 4, but the amazing thing is that was in 1974. That paper still gets quoted a lot,
Yeah.
and so it remains in my top 5 or so. And I remember McCormick told me that it was good to have your paper cited after so much time since you wrote them, and that certainly is a paper that I wrote early, but it was not me by itself. It was Sam and I,
Yeah.
and there was other stories behind that paper because Sam, when I go to Florida, I go to replace John Henry Davis. John Henry Davis
You
was the
replaced John Henry Davis?
yes, that was the and before replacing him, when I went for my interview, he was giving his last lecture, and he invited me to go and listen to his last lecture. And he gave me the handout that he was using for that lecture. I still have the handout because initially I was arrogant. This is part of my mistakes, and I took the lecture and I filed it away. But I listened to his lecture, and he gave a history of the vegetation of Florida, which was a course that I had to teach later.
Right.
So I go and they give me his office, his old office. He has all his equipment, everything that he used to do in mangroves. And I go like this.
Ooh.
I wanted the gas exchange machines, I wanted to do metabolism. I want to do modern things, ecosystem things. That was my view. Then one of my first grants was from the Department of Interior. I didn't want nothing to do with mangroves. But the Department of Interior came in, gave us money to do mangroves. And so I was sort of forced into mangroves. And Sam and I, we were good friends. And so we got the grant together. And Sam was at the museum. I was in the botany department. And we used to have a system of writing papers. Sam is an early morning person. I'm a late night person. So I would work until late night. And at 3 in the morning, I get on my motorcycle and I go to Sam's house with the whatever I had written that evening, and I put it in his door, go home to sleep. Sam would get up at 3 in the morning, whatever, and he would work on it. And then when I wake up, Sam already had the things edited. So we had that tag team. We did that with his dissertation. Sam couldn't finish his dissertation. I tried to help him. I remember one night, about 3 in the morning, I have Sam's dissertation in the rear of my motorcycle, and I'm hitting speed in the 16th Avenue. I think it was in Long Avenue. And the dissertation flows
Oh no.
and it gets scattered all over the thing. So I'm collecting all the pages, these are the things that students don't see. And so, we worked on mangroves by leaving Gainesville, right after lectures on Fridays and coming back real early on Mondays before lecture. And I kept that routine for quite a while. And then eventually I burned out because I said to myself, I remember one class I had, I don't know if you were in that class, but Odum used to send his students to me, to my courses. So Sandra Brown had to take the botany of aquatic plants because she was working in wetlands. And I was barely a chapter ahead of her when I was in those lectures. And Sandra used to tell me that she used to keep an English Spanish dictionary and so that she could keep track of all my Anglicisms. And then she needed a botany dictionary because all those terms that I was using on aquatic plants. So I had all you guys, and you guys were super smart, and you were from different departments, architecture, you were from architecture, environmental engineers, etc. And I had in front of me these classes with this diversity of students, including the ones from wildlife biology that were not as quantitative as you guys, and the people from botany and forestry and so forth. So I remember one day I got to the class after going through all this mangrove stuff on the weekend and the travel and the driving and stuff, and I had no lecture. I was empty. I had nothing. And I said to that was the turning point, because I said, I want to get out of here. I don't think this is good for me. I had to face all you guys without anything. I turned out to be probably the best class because it was open. It was- we had a wonderful discussion, I remember, but I was empty. And to me, that's something that I never like to do. I mean, when I get in front of an audience, I want to be prepared.
Yeah.
And that routine of doing mangroves and teaching at 7:30 in the morning, not a good one.
Yeah, well, I had ecosystems of Florida and ecosystems of the tropics with you.
Okay. And I probably use the rainforest book.
Yeah.
I learned a lot about ecosystems of the tropics much later after I taught that course.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember things that I used to teach in my ecology courses. I used to bring in advertisements from Time Magazine, from logging companies that used to advertise these monocultures of pines that they use for lumber. I used to bring them to class to tear them apart from an ecological perspective. Little did I know that I soon would be working for the U.S. Forest Service, and then I would be defending those things because I learned so much after Florida. I learned so much that half of my teachings I would have done differently if I had the chance to do them now. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. So any other Odum stories that you recall? Your time in Gainesville, was there?
Yeah, well, I think it is important to remember Odum in front of when giving lectures. I don't know if anybody has talked to you about Odum giving lectures, but I never miss an Odum lecturing. Wherever Odum would be speaking in Florida, I would go. And half of my entertainment, I used to do two things in those lectures. First, feel the audience and see how Odum was communicating with them. And usually the audience were completely blown out, and they had no response to what was being said. The other thing that I used to do, I used to keep, when Odum started giving the lecture, I would start keeping track of the points that he was making. You know how if you want to give a lecture nowadays, and when I give lectures now, you have 1 or 2 points, maybe 3 or 4 points, and you drill them and you explain them correctly and soundly. Autumn would come in with 50 points.
Yeah.
I said, holy cow, you know, 50 points. And then each of them was extremely important. And each of them was complicated, but he was throwing them there.
Yeah.
And so to me, they were great learning experiences because I already knew him and I knew where he was coming from. I could then take his points and expand on them in my own mind and use them, etc. So that was an interesting part. The other part I remember one time he came in to give a talk at IFAS, the agriculture department, and he he used to carry a box of
Transparent.
transparent, yeah, because that was the technology of the time. It was better than the slides. I besides Odom would never order the slides, but the transparency, I learned that you can change in order if you want. You have a set of transparencies and give many lectures by changing orders and emphasis.
Right.
All the things that I learned. So Odum walks to the to the podium and puts his first transparency and accidentally hits the others, and they are all spread in the in the stage. They're all there in the stage, all scattered. And one said, "Oh, up, up, up," and he starts picking them up, and he keeps saying, "It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. You were gonna get cows anyway, This is random cows what you're getting now." So that was an incredible thing. One guy had the nerve to ask him a question,
Yeah.
which was a hostile question. And Odom says, what's your field? He answers the question, what is your field? What is your specialty? Ah, okay. So you're familiar with, and then he proceeds to summarize his own field. Okay? And and he answers his question by analogy to his field and completely shuts him out.
Right.
And that was Odum, because Odum, I remember we used to say, well, Odum used to disappear in Chapel Hill. He used to disappear because we were all after him all the time. And every time you get his, he gave you all the time you needed. He never denied you the time. But then he used to disappear. And one day, I'm walking in Chapel Hill on one of the avenues there, and I see Odom in the afternoon with two boxes like this. He was coming from the geology department. And we finally discovered where he was going. He was going to the geology library, where he would pull out books by the scoopful. And then he would take these books to his office and analyze them, because the 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 genius of Odum was that he read everything, and that's why I have a library, because, that's one thing that, you say, my God, if you're going to be effective, you have to read. You have to read everything. People don't read nowadays. And if they read, they only read, what the computer tells you to read. Some of the best discoveries I had, I remember once with Sandra Brown in Washington. We used to go to the stacks, the library stacks, just to look at books at random, because we learned that from Autumn. And you pick up, that's how we discover 3 volumes of an analysis of tropical forests in 1923, just riding through the stacks. And then those volumes, it turns out that they had all the original data, and they became instrumental for all the analysis that we did about tropical rainforests. So Odum was capable of not only reading, but then he was critical, obviously a critical reader. And then when you read his articles and you read his books, you read his systems book and other types of books like that, he summarizes everybody's thinking.
Yeah.
Because he had read all the originals and he understands all the originals. And how can you match that? There's no way.
No
There's no
way.
way you can do it. You have to find your niche and be satisfied that you're working on that one, and continue to admire this guy and apply all the things that he taught you, because I think by by his modeling, he was a great teacher. I mean, he just modeled what a scientist should be, and being his disciples, we all followed it. I don't know. Are you familiar with the history of the Ecological Society?
No.
There's there's a book that is the History of Ecological Society, and I need to point this out to you guys. He
ESA.
Yes, ESA. In that book, he puts a couple of pages on Odum, and he makes some comments about Odum, but he made one that I just realized it, just getting ready for this conversation, that floored me, because he said that only Odum students and collaborators can understand what he was trying to say. And I said to myself, wow, this is a great insight into Howard Odum. We all get upset at the fact that nobody quotes him, nobody follows him, but we also see how his thinking and the things that he was talking about emerge without giving him credit. And the reason is, I think, is what this guy said, is that only his students and his followers understand what he was trying to say. It was a great insight. But how about this one about population biology? I told you I went with McCormick, and I had Odum as my mentor. Well, when we were in graduate school, ecology was split in half: the population ecologist, ecosystem ecologist. I was studying with the population ecologist, and my mentor was a systems ecologist. I learned a ton about population ecology. I met a whole bunch of the original guys in population ecology, and then I started to appreciate them. And I took courses in the zoology department with forget his name now, but there was a professor that used to teach zoology, advanced zoology. I took that course, and he was a population person. And at the time, they were like this, fighting. But look at it now. The population ecology has disappeared as a as a point of view, because they all now are systems ecologists. They all see populations in the context of systems. And I remember talking to Hal Mooney, who started as a population ecologist and now considers himself a systems ecologist. We had a uh, I I I got connected to that group because I took a course with Billings at the at Duke University, and I hit it well with Billings, and then I met all of Billings students, Mooney and all those guys, and so I had that interaction, and so when time came to give Mooney a recognition, all his students were there. I happened to be there. One of the jokes that they were making was, whatever happened to all the population people? Look, they're all talk about being systems people. And of course, they were hitting Mooney on that. And it's true. And I think, Odum had a lot to do with that, but perhaps it was through his students. I don't know how, because Odum always, but his brother also, his brother was more articulate, and his brother reached a lot more people through the ecology, Institute of Ecology in Georgia. And of course, once you come into the Odum family, you learn about the brother. And so maybe that was the way that it happened. But I think that systems ecology now is well alive, even though they don't recognize Odum as much. With the only problem that I see, and that was one of your questions, is that I worry about the complexity of the global models these days is enormous, but the global models are not definitive in terms of advancing ecosystem theory or ecosystem science, because they're almost it's going back to Odum's analog. That's all they do. You put an equation in, and it regurgitates it back for a whole bunch of pixels. And I know that they don't work for Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is 1 or 2 pixels in a global model. And so they pretend to anticipate the future on 2 pixels. That's a mistake that scientists are making these days, because they don't understand fundamental
Yeah.
uh, ecosystem ecology. And so, who knows how this is all going to turn out. Charlie Hall continues to write books, and he's influencing, the economists. Maybe that might be where Odum's future is. Not to mention all the emerging things you guys are doing. Which, when I went to visit you guys recently, I was really impressed. I had no idea what you had done, Mark. I couldn't believe that all that the center of wetland for wetlands has done in Florida and in influencing wetland ecology. Wow.
Yeah.
It is amazing. And I think through those kinds of things is where Odum continues to emerge, even if his writings, like this guy says, is only understood by his students and his followers. That's really bad.
Yeah,
Well,
Ariel, one of the things I wanted to touch on was you're one of the unique people, I think, and that I know of, besides Mark. You had this long-term relationship with Odin because he loved to come down to Puerto Rico every winter. So when I was in Florida in the 90s, I knew that he was going to be gone for a week or two to go see Ariel. So I was wondering if there's like stories or just, what were you guys doing then and what was he doing when he came down? Like what kind of projects were you guys working on? What was that kind of environment like?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. Yes, we had Odum be an advisor to our long-term ecological research program, and I was in the Forest Service, so when we had our 50th anniversary, I invited Odum to give a talk, which we published, and a talk that was edited by a Forest Service editor, and we held Odum down to we through, and he actually was grateful, and he said, "Thank you for this, thank you for this," because that editor was relentless in making that article understandable, and that's where Odom did some models about the future of the tropics. Is part of our 50th anniversary.
Yeah.
And so yes, we kept that relationship. I also went to Florida to give a talk, and he was in the audience, and I was giving a talk that was very controversial on novel ecosystems, the fact that ecosystems, the forest ecosystems of Puerto Rico are novel. They have species composition that are different from what you expect because they're adapting to human activity. So basically, they're human adapted systems. And I remember when I gave that talk, the guy that was after me was Lawrence, who's the extreme of me. I mean, Lawrence is an ultra conservationist, preservationist. And here I'm giving this talk about how nature adapts and ecosystems, change species composition, but keep functioning the way they were functioning before. That guy was so offended that his first 10 minutes of his talk, he spent trying to cut me off, to answer
Yeah.
everything that I said. And I'm thinking, I wonder what Odom is thinking about this. And then he told me, he says, right on. And then when I read Odom's early papers, you read his early papers before Puerto Rico, he has one on ecosystems and man, and uh, and he predicted everything, everything that I was doing in Puerto Rico. Golly Moses, I found it in that paper that when I think it was 80, it was in the 70s, early 70s. Odum had already written about it. So one more story about Odum and Puerto Rico because I think this is important. The one time that I was um, disappointed by Odum. Uh, I came to Puerto Rico initially on a leave of absence from the University of Florida to be Assistant Secretary of Natural Resources in Puerto Rico. And as part of my job in Puerto Rico, I was facing the proposal to do copper mining in the center of the island. And of course, we were against that in the department, but we needed some scientific power from from out of the department to validate our position. And I said to myself, this is an opportunity for me to bring Odum to Puerto Rico. And I remember I went to Gainesville, Florida. I was Assistant Secretary of Natural Resources. I was still young. I was still, maybe in my early 30s or late 20s. I don't know how old I was. So I go to his home and I said, Dr. Odum, we want you to come to Puerto Rico and help us with mining, and we're willing to pay whatever, This is the government of Puerto Rico asking you to come to Puerto Rico and help us with mining. And he said no. He just said no. And I couldn't believe it that he said no. I remember when I left his house, I was crying. I didn't cry in front of him, but I was crying because I was so disappointed that Odum had said no to something that I thought was extremely important. I think he didn't want to do consulting. I think that was probably what made him say no. I went, as it turned out, I went to the University of Georgia, and I got Frank Gully, and I got another ecologist that was the director of their Savannah River plant. I forget his name now, but he was famous ecologist on estuarine ecology, and both of them said yes. And we got our scientific opinion, and we stopped the mining. But that moment with Odum, that was the one time that he said no to me, and I was crushed.
Mm, mm. I do know that he never consulted, never. Of the 35 years that I knew him, he never took a consulting job.
I took a job of consulting when I was a professor in Florida, and I never did it again. And I learned it independent of Odum, because what you learn when you're a consultant is that they own you, and whatever you do, it belongs to them, doesn't belong to you, and so they can select what they're going to say and what they're not going to say. I learned that quickly. That was it. I never did consulting again.
I also, he was not, he used to say back during the 70s when everybody was trying to be an environmental activist or, politically active. He said, you're either an activist or you're a scientist. You can't be both.
Right. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Because that's my beef with a lot of scientists. They take positions and that are based on emotion.
Yeah.
And to me, that's one of the you have something you wish newer scientists and students knew about systems ecology. Well, I wrote that systems ecology is value free, is empiric and objective. And the problem with young scientists today is that they take personal positions based on their values, not on their science. And I think I learned that from Odum, and I preach it wherever I go. I think ethics needs to be taught at the universities because ethics are now are so important. Ecology is so important for society now that ecologists have to be well versed in ethics, and they have to be well versed in what they're talking about and not be giving opinions. I made Sandra Brown and I made a career in writing papers about destroying myths of tropical forestry. One of my favorite things is the predictions that tropical ecologists make. None of the predictions that they make ever come true. What they do is that they simply move the goalpost. So everything is gonna go in hell to hell in a handbasket. In the 80s, that was the population bomb of Ehrlich. I was a student. I believed it. I was waiting to see people dying in the streets of the United States out of hunger, and they didn't do it. Now they're dying now, but at the time they didn't. And the population bomb was a fraud. That was the first. And then you see all these extinctions. Oh, this is the decade of biodiversity because if we don't do something in the next 10 years, we are doomed. Then the 10 years pass. Well, the next 10 years. is that's because they're making opinions not on science, but making opinions on values. And that's a real problem today. Listen, one last question that you asked. I don't know if you have any more for me, but I want to get this one in. You asked the last one. You said one question you wish you could ask Dr. Odum if we were with us today. It's very simple for me. What was your relationship with the military, and when conducting work in the Pacific. Remember, he worked in the Pacific on the coral reef with his brother and
Yeah.
Puerto Rico. Now, his work in the Pacific was incredible. That paper on the uh, coral reefs, Odum and Odum, is one that everybody needs to read. And I don't know if you're aware, but in the 1980s, the NSF uh, funded a trip, a ship to go back to that reef that Odum and Odum studied and repeat the study, except now they went with all the tools of science, everything modern, and they had to eat it. There's a paper where they say everything they did is right. they, they they couldn't find anything that Odum had not said, which is another issue that we had in Puerto Rico. A lot of people did not believe in the long-term ecological research work that what Odum has said in the rainforest book was true. So independent of me, they brought in a whole bunch of scientists that check Odum, and they couldn't touch him. They couldn't touch Odum. So the reason I want to ask him this question is because I have now been in touch. People are calling me, historians are calling me about this rainforest project. And some of the experiences that I've been having with them are not positive. I mean, some of them have questioned Odum's integrity and Odum's commitment and his intentions. There's a thesis written. I had to write a letter to the professor of that thesis. I said, what kind of degree is this? That you write a thesis on this project and you don't check your original sources with us. But
Yeah.
she never answered. She never answered. But the point is that now they're reinterpreting that project, and they're reinterpreting from the political point of view of where the U.S. was in relation to South America, the Caribbean, etc. And the Rainforest Project doesn't come out pretty. I mean, a project that we think was incredible from the point of view of education, ecology, science, everything else, we talk and talk and talk and talk about that, is now being trashed as being a manipulation of the U.S. military uh, complex, to take over Central America. I say, oh, wow. I would like to ask Odum that because Odum never talked about that. He never talked about it. In fact, he never talked about his work in the coral reefs.
Yeah.
Simply because of the relationship that we had with him. It was not that when you're young, you're not interested in history. When you're young, you're interested in what you're doing, and your perspective, unless you're, better than we are. I mean, you don't have those perspectives. But now that I have it, and now that I have encountered these historians that are badgering us and coming to Puerto Rico and looking over our files, all that is happening. I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how about you, Mark? Did you ever talk to him about these things?
No, no, I did not. I do know from, having spent so much time with him that it was the science that drove everything that he did. It was always the opportunity to do some really hard, really good science. And having that ability down there to study everything it was perfect. I mean, after Silver Springs and after the Coral Reef Project, I mean, it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect thing. There's a big system with lots of money to study, everything you wanted to study. But yeah,
And
I don't.
you say lots of money, and it's true, it was lots of money. But I saw the first proposal. Pat Kanga sent it to me. It was $60,000,
Know.
$100,000. That doesn't that doesn't buy computer time now for a modern proposal. They all start at the millions.
Right.
Oh my goodness, how times change.
Well,
think it'd
he
be
had
interesting.
money from the Department of Defense on the mangrove project to look at the
Yeah,
effect of Agent Orange on the mangroves. And no, he brought in, I did a model of the entire country of South Vietnam at war, and he brought in all kinds of people doing everything else. And he would say, we'll give them what they want. For the money that they gave us, we'll give them what they want. But that gives us the ability to study everything else, and it was always the science. It was, it was fantastic. I mean, it was great.
You mentioned Pat Kangas, Ariel, and I don't know when's the last time you talked to him, but his new project is he is looking at the history of the relationship between Odum and his brother, and there's all the letters that they wrote to each other over the decades that are at the archives in Gainesville. So Pat's been looking over those in association with Odum's daughter, um,
Mary.
Mary.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. It might be worth a conversation with Pat about what's in the letters in regards to Puerto Rico. I don't know if there's anything there or not. Haven't talked to him about any of that.
Well, his brother came to Puerto Rico, and I had the privilege of driving him around. And that was to me a fantastic experience to be with Eugene Odum, whom I had already heard deliver the famous paper that he published in Science uh, about. Um, I'm trying to remember the name of the paper.
The
Um,
ecosystem organization paper.
yeah, it's the one where he compared successional species, successional systems with mature systems, and he gave that
It's
at
just strategy for ecosystem
yes,
development.
that's the one. Strategy of ecosystem development. That's in Science magazine. I heard him give it orally at the ESA meeting in, I think it was in Illinois in the early '60s. I remember I was elated through the whole thing. And then when we got out into the hallway, McCormick, who was my advisor, he and I were together because we play basketball together all the time. And he tells me he didn't say anything new. We knew about everything, and it's true. But that's the magic of the Odum. We all knew what he said, but nobody had put it together the way he put it together. And to me, that paper is the root of the today's um, um, split in conservation biology. There's a conservation group. Well, there's always been preservationists against and the wise use. Pincho and Muir. That's all. But we have it today with many conservationists that only want to preserve everything, and because it's mature, and the maturity, Odum in that paper gave the nod for protecting maturity, and then all the models focus on mature systems because they were steady state, and you can have that assumption. And all of the ecology went through that direction, and they forgot about the successional systems, which I think are the ones that are prevailing today.
Yeah.
And so today you have people that don't want to recognize the successional systems because they are so focused on the mature system. So that was E.P. Odum in that paper and that moment, which I also happened to be, and that's where I shook the hands um, of another famous ecologist. I forget his name because my mind now is going. But the point was that Odum came to Puerto Rico, and I drove him around, and then his son was sent to Puerto Rico to do a project that when I saw what he was doing, see, this is the thing about these people. They always have these simple ways of studying systems. Uh, Odum's son, Bill, he came to Puerto Rico and he put nets across the Sonadora Creek that we had crossed. Murphy and I had crossed that creek a zillion times. And we even built a bridge over it. It was the route that you took to the rainforest study sites. And Bill Odum, being the son of Eugene Odum, gets to study putting these nets the export of organic matter from the watershed. And Peter and I said, holy cow, why didn't we
Why
think
didn't we think of that?
lucky guy, this lucky guy, he's doing
Yeah.
this cool study that and it turns out then that Bill turned into mangroves and I got to interact with him and Hill, Eric Hill, studying mangroves in South Florida. So, you know, it was a small world. And all this had to do with the Odum brothers. So I assume there's a lot of um, correspondence in arranging for Bill's study in the radiation project because he's the first guy that when he took him out to the field, we didn't take the radiation side. We left him in the water. That was kind of cool.
Well, I've told this story before, but one Friday afternoon, HT and I were leaving the center, and he said, "Oh, my brother's coming this weekend. He's coming down to take my ideas and go back and make them popular."
Yeah, we had similar conversations. Yeah.
That's really, the way it was. Well, Ariel, anything else that you want to say about your relationship or?
I'm looking at your questions. I think the one thing that we have not talked about energy, which is your specialty, and I feel compelled to make a comment about that because I figure that you can classify Odum students by when they came in his thinking about the calorie. So
Yeah.
I met Odum when the calorie was heat
Yes.
and the calorie and was analog to Ohm's law, you know, with the flow of electrons. That's me. That's my
Right.
generation. That's Jack Hule. Then came in the fossil fuel equivalence, which I thought was brilliant because it was 10,000 calories, kilocalories per calorie of fossil fuel. That's a number that we thought would be the number, you know, to ever convert um, energy to economics. And Odum, you know, he always bridged humans and nature because they're part of the same thing. And then that was his first effort at bridging economics into ecosystems. And so there was a whole bunch of students that came in, and we were shook, but we took it. I think Jack Hule took it. I know Jack Hule stepped up the train when energy came in because after fossil fuel equivalence, there was I don't know, there was another one. I don't remember which, but energy was like the culmination that of Odum had. And I understand energy, and I hired. He was at the meeting. Remember, you were part of it to enter energy into the Forest Service.
Right. Right.
We failed, but I did capture several people that were very influential in the agency, but they got almost to being chief. They
Yeah.
didn't get to chief. If that person would have made it to chief, believe me, energy would have come into the Forest Service.
Right.
Got it. We got it in, and we got our licks, and I still use the presentation that you guys made. I still use it when Forest Service people, because the Forest Service continues to deal with this problem, like all agencies do. But
Yeah.
anyway, that was my last point. That I think different groups of students came in at different points of time,
Yeah.
and so they they were indoctrinated for different ways of looking at energy. And I say that because I know that Jackie will step up, step down of the on the train. He was very critical of the energy thing, but I think
And
you guys,
Charlie too. Charlie Hall is
Charlie
fairly.
Hall, yeah, that's the other one.
Yeah.
Were you there when Charlie Hall and um, remind me the name of the economist student of Odum that became famous?
Costanza. Costanza.
Costanza. Costanza was also in my courses, and we used to play volleyball together. Anyway, were you in the meeting where Charlie Hall and Costanza crossed swords?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, this was a meeting in Estes Park, and it was at the beginning of the long-term ecological research program, and it was probably some of the best meetings they had because at the beginning, long-term ecological research was beginning to get a hold, and they used to bring us all, and we used to be in together in one auditorium, and then they will bring people in to give talks, and it was very exciting intellectually. Well, I think it was in the second year of this, they brought in Costanza to give a talk. And you know the story of Constanza better than I do. I don't know the story of Constanza very well, but I do know that he and Odum broke, and it was too bad
Yeah.
because and maybe that's analogous to Eugene Odum and Howard Odum. Who knows? I think there might be something there. But the point was that Costanza now comes in with the vest, three-piece suit, and I don't recognize Constanza. I remember Constanza playing volleyball. And you know how that was, no shoes, ponytails, the whole works.
Right.
Here's Costanza, man, he looks like an executive. And he's talking to the long-term ecology, all the PIs, the creme de la creme of ecology in the United States. And in the back seat is Charlie Hall. And I'm sitting there humbly listening to this, and Costanza gives his standard talk that he gives about the relation. I've seen that so many times. It's always the same, but where he talks about the ecological part, and when he's talking about the ecological part, he pretends he's an economist, and then he brings the economical part, and then he pretends he doesn't know he's an ecologist, and so he gives this wimpy talk. That we had already read, but it was probably new for everybody else because the thing about the Odum students, we keep track of each other. So out goes Charlie Hall's hands, and Charlie he 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 didn't he didn't have a question, but was an editorial, and the editorial went on and on, full voice, perfect projection for everybody to hear, because that's Charlie Hall,
Right.
here, fight me. He was almost like Odum in that sense.
Yeah.
The one thing that I remember about that editorial is that he says, we came here to listen to you to give us substance. And instead you gave us pablum.
Pablum.
Never forget that. He said that to him in front of everybody.
Yeah.
So, and on and on. I think you are the next generation from those two, I guess.
Yeah.
And you can probably do a scale of Odum students by where they came in.
Yeah. Costanza was a fossil fuel work equivalent guy. And then after that came Emergy, and I guess that would be Solar M Joule is the next version.
The Solar M Joule, yeah.
Well, I saw a letter from Costanza to HT. He passed it around, and Costanza was just blasting him. And one of the things that he was really critical of was that Odum had allowed this guy, David Science Man, to become friendly and was visiting us at the University of Florida, and Science Man was actually the originator of the word emergy. And he's a physicist from Australia, and his name was really well, it was David Slade, but he changed his name to Science Man legally so that
God.
that's for another whole, it was about a political party. He thought we ought to have a scientific party, and to sort of move that forward, he changed his name as a PR gimmick, but he was a David Science Man. But Costanza just blasted Odum for surrounding, and he called Science Man a charlatan.
Ah,
For no reason. I mean, the guy was a weird, very strange man, but he also was a physicist and knew his physics and knew his nomenclature. And that's the thing he kept banging on Odum about, was you got to get your nomenclature correct. You got to get your because Odum, we have many different names for it: fossil fuel work equivalents, and then solar equivalents, and then. And so it was Science Man really that made HT focus on, all right, defining things rigorously, what they were. Anyway, got off on a tangent. Sorry.
no, that's interesting to know. That's good to know. But Odum would make alliances with all kinds of people, with Cousteau.
Oh yeah.
He because he always saw the value of whoever, and he could ignore your weaknesses. And
No.
so he always made you think that you were in control, and that you were right, and you had a good point, and he would reinforce that and would not, trash you.
Yeah.
And so, trashing was not part of.
When when he passed away, people wrote emails, and we collected them all and put them in a booklet, and almost every one of them said the very thing, that he made me feel like I was worth something, and he never belittled anything or anyone about whatever idea you had. He was able to turn it into something much bigger than it was to begin
Right.
with. Make you feel like wow, I
No,
came
no,
up.
yeah. That's exactly right.
Anyway, he's yeah. Anything else, Ariel?
No,
This has been great. It's been
I've
wonderful.
enjoyed it too.
This is better than great. This is charming, very charming. So easy too. I really appreciate your ability. You really prepared and shared a whole lot. This is great. I know people are really going to appreciate all these
My
stories that
pleasure.
you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's what this is for, though. We want to share with the future.
Yeah, well, I would like to hear the others. Obviously, it would be
Yeah.
interesting to hear other
Every one of them is about an hour and a half long. That's it's a major commitment of time. But
I have the time to do that.
I have the time now. Yeah. Well,
We'll get them to you.
I'll send you links to them as
Okay.
they go along.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you
Thank
for the
you very much,
opportunity.
Ariel. This has been a real pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.